very happy to be here today presenting to you all. Really happy to see how this kind of movement has continued to progress over the years. It seems like it's gaining a lot of steam in Calgary, and we're seeing a lot more folks and individuals interested in data and analytics as a whole. And this event really is a testament to that. Apologies here, I had to rejig some of my slides last minute, so if things look a little bit off, I apologize for that. But let me start with a personal introduction. So as Tim mentioned, my name is Andrew. I'm the Director of Data and Analytics at NEO. I've been at NEO for about a year, and there I have the privilege of leading an excellent team of data engineers, analysts, and advanced analytics practitioners who are probably the most stellar team I've ever had the experience of working with. So I think a lot of them are on the call. Shout out to my great teammates here from NEO. Previous to working at NEO, I was the manager of data innovation at TransAlta, a utility here in Alberta. I worked in that role for 2 years, and I really cut my teeth in the analytics space previous to that, working as a performance engineer on performance analytics related to large power generation facilities. I have a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from the U of C. I won't say what year I got that from. It's been quite a while. But that really is my professional background. On a more personal note, I'm married to my wife, Alyssa. I have 2 daughters, who you see in the picture. I also have a furry little friend named Margot. She's a Border Collie Corgi mix, who's a lot of energy and a lot of fun. I'm a big outdoor enthusiast. I live in the best place in the world to be an outdoor enthusiast. I love to hike, bike, cross-country ski, camp, you name it. And a lot of folks who are on the call who know me will know that I'm a big movie and TV buff. In fact, I often tend to speak in terms of movie and TV quotes. Usually it's quite cryptic. People have no idea what I'm talking about unless they've seen that movie and they understand my personality. But that's me. And without further ado, I think we should just get into the topic of our conversation here today. So Tim asked a great question. He asked, what is data theater? And I think back actually to a conversation I had a couple of years ago, which kind of informs the title that I chose for this presentation. I've been working as part of a team outside of my functional expertise as an engineer on an analytics project. And we'd worked on it for 3 or 4 months. Up front, we had determined there was a substantial amount of value to be had if we could use data and analytics to inform some of our decision-making process within our organization. A lot of the folks on the team worked really hard. We worked alongside the groups that we were producing these products for. But ultimately, at the end of the project, it was kind of a flop. And I'm sorry to say it. It was a lot of effort, a lot of really good work. But we found that the tools and the products we produced weren't really being used or actively integrated into the organization that I worked for. It wasn't really a problem with scoping or identifying the problem correctly. The technical solution was great. We'd even developed a number of applications, dashboards, reports to try to surface and get this information in the hands of decision makers. But ultimately, it fell short. And I recall kind of in a retrospective on that with some of our business leaders sitting in a meeting. And one of my leaders who I respected greatly kind of looked at me and said, Andrew, it's like, I get the feeling that all this data stuff is just theater, he said. He said, we've been hearing about the value of data from external sources, from people within our organization. We've committed resources, we've tried these things, but it doesn't seem to move the needle. It doesn't really seem to be producing the results we expect it to produce. And I was shocked. I'll admit I was a little taken aback, but I understood where he was coming from. And I remember a couple years later, scanning through an article that Accenture had put together. They had performed a survey on 120 business executives in North America, and they had asked them about the impact of data and analytics, on their organization. And some of the shocking information that came back was that of those companies surveyed, only 32% of them reported being able to realize tangible and measurable value from their data. And even worse, only 27% said that data and analytics projects produce actions or insights and recommendations that were highly actionable. That's concerning. And while this survey is a couple years old, and I assume we've made great progress since then. It's still a large gap. So the question really that I posed to you today is, why do so many organizations fail to scale beyond proof of concepts and simple data products? And how do we avoid falling victim to this data theater that this business leader had called me out on in my past life? What I wanted to provide to you today in the brief 30 minutes that we have together is a very simple framework that I've used to think about ways that we can grow and scale analytics while avoiding the pitfalls and the traps of data theater. I've condensed it into 3 steps because I guess 3 is a magic number and that works for people. Obviously, there's much more depth there. I'd encourage anyone on the call, if you ever want to reach out, have a coffee and chat more about this, I'd be happy to elaborate further. So what are the steps? And these are supposed to have like a transition thing, so I apologize if it looks wonky. It didn't quite work the way I expected it to. Yeah, a 3-step program. The first step I'm going to talk you through today is baby steps. Draw a direct path to value. And this is really about building a catalog of projects or data projects that are aligned with the value or the definition of value within your organization. And in the visual here, you can see Dr. Leo Marvin with his bestseller, Baby Steps, from the movie What About Bob, a favorite of mine. Step 2, save your future self. Analytics done properly gets easier as you grow, not harder. And this is something I'm very passionate about. The idea is to move beyond individual data products and start to look at a data portfolio or projects as a whole. And again, you can see a reference here to Back to the Future. One of my favorite lines, roads, where we're going, we don't need roads. And I'm not going to try to say it like Doc Brown does. Finally, step 3, always be closing. Choose action over insight. And a great picture here of Alec Baldwin and Gary Ross, that famous line, always be closing. This is really about ensuring that we create the channels to move action to insight and close the loop on our analytics practices within our organizations. So step 1, baby steps. How do we build that catalog of data projects and products within our organizations? So the first baby step that I'll walk you through today is to understand how your organization creates value. And that seems trivial, it perhaps seems overly simplistic, but I think you'd be surprised what happens in most companies when you sit down in a group of leaders and ask them to define value within their organization. I sat in rooms where it almost becomes a fist fight, where people have different definitions and they believe that different things are valuable for an organization. It's important to sit down and do the exercise of defining that. For a lot of companies, it might be profitability, it might be safety. If you work for a social agency, it might be some social outcome that you're looking to improve. But value is really defined differently in every organization. And it's important that you have those discussions up front and you understand how we arrive at those values, the relationships between various parts of the business and achieving those values as well. And there are tools that you can use. Value tree mapping, if you're familiar, is a great tool to get people in a room and start talking about the various things that we do as an organization and how they relate to the value we create. I'd encourage you as you go through this exercise to not approach it from the context of your existing role. If everyone were an engineer, the world would be a terrible place. And I think the same is true for most professions. Try to put on a different hat, see it from a different perspective. If you're not an accountant, look at it from a financial or an accounting lens. If you're not a lawyer, dig a little bit into the legal context behind the problem you're trying to solve and the value you produce with your organization. Finally, understanding how your organization creates value is great, but data and analytics teams are in a unique place where we can actually measure it and we can provide feedback to the organization on how we're actually moving the ball forward towards that value. Measuring it is a great way to understand the various mechanisms that underlie that value and the levers that we have to improve it. Baby step 2, build relationships. And I apologize, I'll drink some water. This is critical as you're starting to build up your catalog of data projects. Building relationships will allow you kind of an inroads within various parts of your organization to make an impact. And it's important that as you build those relationships, you ask very specific questions. You'll be surprised, or maybe you've done this before. People generally love talking about their work. I never expected this. I think early on in my career, I was very shy. I would be afraid to approach someone and ask them how a piece of equipment worked, or how we made money from this particular process. But when you actually get down to it, people generally love to talk at length about the work that they do and are happy to answer very specific questions about the nature of their work. Also, as you seek to build those relationships, think about finding cross-function or building a cross-functional support team. So looking for folks within various parts of your organization who can support you on your data initiatives. It might be a person who sits in finance who has a really good knack for data, is constantly looking for additional data sets to do their work. It might be someone who's passionate about the value of analytics in their organization, but has no exposure to data and analytics. But find that support team within other parts of your organization. And finally, a great way to build relationships in a company is to scratch an itch or two. I think we all know of places where we have people perhaps running inefficient processes or making decisions off of suboptimal data sets. Sometimes it helps to scratch those itches and build some good rapport with folks from those parts of your organization. The third baby step that I'll walk you through is inventorying your data. Don't start working on a data project or even putting together a business case until you've taken stock of what you actually have. And it's not just about having the data, it's also about some of the other things that come alongside that data, things like integration. A lot of us have legacy systems. Can you even integrate to that system and get the data that you need to solve the problem? Complexity. I recall sitting I think we were in discussions a couple of years looking at SAP, ECC, and trying to dissect raw tables in that system. It was ridiculously complex, and it was a huge waste of effort to even try dissecting it. And I think we went with a third-party solution to do that. But it highlights the need to understand the complexity that exists in the data before you move forward. Compliance is another consideration. In some cases, we may have the data, but it might not be something we're able to access for various reasons. And finally, availability of your data is also super important. If it's delivered on a daily basis after the time that you need it to make a decision, it may as well not be available to you at all. And dig into your data, ask questions, test assertions, get to know your data very closely. Once you've done that, now's a good time to focus on showing and telling, or doing the show and tell exercise with your various business partners or stakeholders. People, hear a lot of information about the value of data analytics. A lot of people believe that it's real. I think we all know companies and instances where it's gone very well, but it's really hard to make that tangible association to the value it's going to provide your organization without showing them something. So wireframing that dashboard, that report, even that ML model can really help in terms of kind of building the consensus and the business case for that data product you're looking to have built. It helps engage stakeholders with a sense of possibility. They start to imagine different outcomes. They start to ask questions or provide feedback on things that you might not have been aware of walking into that problem. And a little trick that I tend to kind of pass along to folks on my teams: learn some basic app development skills. You'd be surprised how easy it is to stitch together a very simple data product, showing a machine learning model that's scoring something in real time, or showing a data set that would help someone in another part of the business make a decision. It's actually not that hard. I'm not suggesting that anyone here should become an expert in that if it's not what they want to do. But tools like Shiny and R, or simple web framework tools can help a lot in terms of communicating your ideas effectively to the stakeholders. Once you've done this, it's a good time to beef up your business case. I always tell people, focus on simplicity. No leader wants to read a 10-page or 20-page document on your data science. A one-pager is fine. If you can't communicate it in one page, you may have a different problem. Focus on an MVP with an MVC, which is really about ensuring you've identified your minimum viable product or the most atomic level of functionality that you need to provide. with a minimum viable coalition, which is really the most reduced set of stakeholders that you need to be successful on your project. And be assertive. Data folks tend to be a quiet bunch. We're competing often in these organizations for funding or attention from maybe a sales team or a marketing team that might be a little bit more assertive than we are. So don't be afraid to be assertive, to state the benefits, to state the costs of your project, but to not fall back on being too passive in terms of how you deliver that. The last baby step that I'll mention is to hedge your bets. Don't focus on just one thing. I think there's a real tendency when we find something that's interesting to have a pet project that we want to move forward. But it's really important, especially for data and analytics leaders, to develop a broad portfolio of data products at this stage. And as much as possible, to take those data products and break them down even further to reduce barriers to entry. So those are just some helpful tips I found in terms of building out that catalog of potential data products. But once you've done that and you have a funnel built and you have a lot of projects in that funnel, it becomes time to execute. And that's where we move to step 2. And this visual did not work out because of my issue with slide transitions. So I'm going to attempt to verbally walk you through it. It probably won't be very good. I apologize, but I'll do my best here. When you get together a list of projects or a group of projects, you get the funding in place. Maybe you have 3 to 5 initiatives that you're trying to work on. There's a tendency in most organizations to just get started, to look at each product as an individual product, to map out the various steps that you need to follow to get to that product being produced or being available, and then just to execute. We all have seen Gantt charts that we lay it out in linear terms, and we kind of move through those steps until we've achieved the end result. But I'd encourage you to not do that. I'd encourage you to save your future self and think about building your analytics practice in a way that scales in the future. What that means is, I think I'll try. I will probably fail in explaining it here. If I have 3 products that I'm trying to build, those 3 products are likely composed of various pieces of code and various pieces of logic. Where possible, ensure that you reuse code to reduce the complexity of your design or of your build. And then also look to reuse logic. So look at places where you can start to leverage a logic layer to avoid replicating logic across different products. And perhaps I will share this graphic after. We'll do a lot better job than I can verbally explaining that concept. But essentially, the idea is to think in terms of portfolios and not projects. Optimizing across a portfolio offers significant performance improvements. We can start to reduce the number of transformations that are happening in a process. We can build more robust test cases against that reduced set. And we can also start to look at reusing logic within an organization in a way that scales very well. But in order to do that, you need to be a bit of a generalist. So we can't take the view of maybe product 1 is in operations. I'm a great operations person. I understand analytics from an operations perspective. I'll build this kind of end-to-end product there. That doesn't really work. You need people who understand the financial implications of the data, or you need people who understand the perhaps marketing or the various parts of that data product across an organization. And the goal here is really to move beyond specific solutions to problems. This is probably best explained by looking at individual functions within a data and analytics team. So I'll start with data engineers. For data engineers, it's important to think in terms of configuration. So where is it possible to build something once, a general solution, and then configure it to achieve any number of potential outcomes? So if you're building that data pipeline that relies on a SFTP data transfer, that's cool. That generally looks the same across 10, 20, 30 different data products. Build it once, configure it, and then start to develop really robust test cases against it to ensure that that piece is reliable when it's reused within multiple data products. And there are a lot of tools that can be used to kind of help data engineers do this. There are great tools on the pipelining side, as well as the integration side that that kind of give people a tool chest they can use going into those problems. For data analyst, it means looking at establishing a logic layer. Centralizing commonly used logic in critical business definitions is key. The idea here is to define it once. I'm sorry, Tim, I can't see your comment there. But essentially the idea is to define it once and reuse it as much as possible. So for analytics folks who work in SQL, tools like dbt can be immensely helpful along those lines. It gives you the ability to maintain data models and lineage associated with those in a way that scales very well. And it's really important as you start to do this work that you keep data governance in mind. Data governance is a term that gets thrown around quite a bit, but it does mean something. And I think the important things to think about as you work towards building a scalable analytics practice is really to focus in on areas of data lineage as well as business definitions as you establish that logic layer. For data scientists, what this means is looking beyond your Jupyter notebooks. I'm sorry to all the data scientists and advanced analytics practitioners on the call, but that model that you've produced at the end of the Jupyter notebook you have, or your Databricks notebook, whatever it may be, isn't super useful on its own. It actually needs to get integrated into the fabric of an organization to have value. So starting to think about concepts like ML ops, which may include model management, how we manage different versions of our models, how we manage different test cases associated with our models, deployment, how we make that model available for consumption in downstream processes or applications. These are all important things to start to think about as you think about how you save your future self and build an analytics platform or practice that scales. Finally, step 3, always be closing. This is probably the step that I am most passionate about because I think this is where the majority of data teams fall down. So top performing, there's an article written or released a few months ago actually by McKinsey. It was called Breaking Away: Secrets to Scaling Analytics. One of the things that caught my eye as I read that was this idea that top performing data and analytics practices spend almost 50% of their resources on integration. And in this case, top performing was indicative of those companies that have realized exponential value from data and analytics initiatives within their organization. But 50% of their resources are going towards integration. That seems excessive, but I think it speaks to the magnitude of the problem that data and analytics practices have in terms of getting their insights into the hands of decision makers and into the processes that actually define the actions that we carry out as organizations. So I have limited time left, so I'll move quickly through these, but there are 3 things I wanted to highlight here that can help you close the loop on analytics in your organization. The first, related to the earlier snippet I had from McKinsey, is to focus on integration. Focus on the ways that you can embed data products into the fabric of your organization. What this means is that Power BI dashboard you have that may or may not be viewed might not be the best way of providing those insights. It's better to prioritize active over passive. So if we can get the information into the hands of decision makers or into that process, it's 10 times more likely to be used. Finally, as we're starting to focus on integration, we need to harden our integration pipelines. I think 2 or 3 years ago, if anyone had machine learning or AI pipelines within their company, most of them probably resembled a Rube Goldberg machine, various things kind of moving in parallel, tended to be a little bit of a chaotic process. But things have gotten a lot better. There are a lot better tools out there to help you do this. There's a lot more information that kind of highlights the pitfalls of where this tends to fall down. So focus on hardening those integration pipelines to build trust with your analytics products and to ensure the reliability and availability of those as your business continues or as your practice continues to grow. The second thing I'll talk about quickly here is just to understand the decision-making process. So identify the true decision maker in that business process, and doing that is really key. The true decision maker is not the business leader or the executive in charge of that area. It's probably the person who is actioning or performing those actions within that process on a day-by-day basis. So if you work in a facility, it's not going to be your EVP of operations. It might just be a control board operator. And it's important to get the right information to those people. To help do that, codifying a process is very important. There are BPM tools that can help you do that. But where you have processes that exist in a collective hive mind of people, it's very hard to integrate. So start to document that process, start to capture it, and identify the ways in which you can integrate your analytics product into that process. And finally, within those decision-making processes, embrace uncertainty and find ways to inform it with data. Data we have this great ability with data to start to measure and quantify that uncertainty. And it's often quite helpful in the decision-making processes that we run within our organizations. The last thing I'll detail here is to close the loop. So when you're actually you're finally going to change that business process, it's really important to have buy-in. It's really difficult to get buy-in to change a process. I think most organizations are intrinsically designed to reject or avoid change. So it's important to build consensus and buy-in before you implement the change. But as you do it, think about ways that you can augment the existing process first. So the idea is to take data and inform a decision-making process versus make the decision on its own in isolation. So I think we've all heard of the idea of human and machine working side by side, and it really does work. If you give someone the information they need to do their job, these things tend to work quite well and to produce quite a bit of value. Finally, the last thing I'll talk about is to not forget the feedback loop. Ensure that you have appropriate feedback loops built into your processes to understand how your analytics products are performing in real time, if possible, and use that feedback to inform how you think about future development. In conclusion, I know we're at time, so I'll just run through these again. Step one, baby steps. Build that portfolio of data projects with good business cases that draw a direct line between your project and value within your organization. Step two, save your future self. We're getting EO, so I'm thinking of saving all the time. Save your future self. Analytics should get easier over time, not harder. Thinking about the ways that you can approach your work from a portfolio basis versus a per project basis. Finally, step three, always be closing. Focus on the ways that you can turn action or turn insight into action